She leaned close enough that I could smell something like cedar and rain, and she said it so quietly I wasn't sure she'd said it at all. She said I was her husband. Not that she wanted me to be. Not someday. Right now. For the next 3 hours, she said, with steady eyes and a voice that was somehow both afraid and certain, I was the man she had married. I still had my hand on the headrest of the seat in front of her. I had walked over to ask if she needed help with a bag. That was all I had planned to do. Ask, maybe lift something down from the overhead rack, and go back to my own row. But she looked at me like she was waiting for me to understand something she couldn't say out loud, and I noticed then that her hands were pressing flat against her thighs, steadying themselves, and I noticed the way her eyes shifted just briefly toward the back of the car, toward whoever had just boarded. I stood there for maybe 2 seconds. Then I sat down beside her. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know why she needed me or who she was hiding from or what she was running toward. I only knew she had chosen me out of a whole train car full of strangers, and something in the way she'd said it made me feel like maybe that meant something. It turned out it meant everything. My name is Caleb Marsh. I'm 31 years old, and I live and work out of a 2-room workshop on the east side of Asheville, North Carolina. I make furniture, custom pieces, mostly tables, chairs, built-in shelving, headboards, the occasional porch swing that someone's been dreaming about for 15 years. My hands are rough in a way that takes people by surprise when they shake them. I sand things down for a living. I measure twice. I cut once. I'm patient in the way that wood requires you to be patient, which means I'm not very exciting at parties, and I'm not the kind of man who walks into a room and changes the temperature. I've made peace with that. Mostly I was taking the train to Charlotte that day because my truck needed work I couldn't afford yet, and because I had a consultation scheduled with a client who wanted a dining table built from reclaimed oak. I'd packed one bag, brought a book I probably wouldn't read, and a small carved sparrow in my jacket pocket, a test piece I'd finished the night before, just to see how the new grain knife handled maple. I carry pieces sometimes. Old habit. I had a window seat in car 7. I'd been watching the ridges stack up and turn blue in the distance for 40 minutes, and not thinking about much when I noticed the woman 2 rows up struggling with her rolling bag. She wasn't actually struggling, she was managing fine. But the bag was heavy, and she was tired, and something about the way she was handling it alone made me stand up anyway. That was my nature. My mother used to say I'd carry the world for a stranger before I'd ask a friend for a dime. It got me into trouble sometimes. Or it kept me quiet and useful and invisible, which was the same thing dressed differently. My last relationship ended 2 years before this train ride. Her name was Claire, and she was kind in most ways, and when she left, she told me I was too quiet, too ordinary, too content with a small life. She didn't say it to wound me. She said it like she was explaining why a plant won't grow in a particular soil. Matter of fact. I went home and sanded a table for 8 hours and thought about whether she was right. The truth was, I didn't know. I only knew the table was beautiful and fit the room perfectly and someone was going to love it. I thought that should mean something. I hadn't let myself get close to anyone since, not because I still loved her, but because her words had settled inside my chest like a splinter I'd stopped trying to find. That was where I was when I stood up to help with a bag. That was the man who sat down beside a stranger and decided to stay. When I stood up, she had already gotten the bag down herself. She was setting it on the seat beside her, unzipping the top compartment with focused, efficient hands. She was dressed in dark slacks and a light gray blouse, and her dark hair was pulled back in a way that looked like it had been neat that morning and had since had a long day. She was pretty in the way that doesn't announce itself. The kind you notice slowly, then don't stop noticing. She didn't look up when I stepped into the aisle. "Need any help?" I said. She looked up then, and her expression shifted. Not because she recognized me. She didn't. But because she had heard something behind me, the doors at the far end of the car sliding open. And her face went from composed to something else very quickly. She looked past my shoulder for half a second. Then she looked back at me like she was doing a calculation. "Sit down," she said. "Please." It wasn't rude. It was urgent in a quiet way. The way you'd say it to someone you'd known a long time and needed to trust right now. I sat. My own seat was 2 rows behind. I just sat in the empty one beside her, because the please had come out in a voice that asked for something without asking. She leaned toward me, and that was when she said it. "I need you to be my husband for the next 3 hours. I know that sounds insane. I'll explain everything, but right now I need you to just be here. Please." I looked at her. Her hands were flat on her thighs. Her jaw was set. She was not a woman who said please easily. I could tell that much. Whatever was coming up that aisle meant enough to her that she'd asked a stranger to pretend to belong to her. "All right," I said. It came out of me before I'd thought about it. Something in her eyes had that quality. Not helplessness, the opposite of that. It was someone who had calculated the only option available and was asking for what she needed with as much dignity as she could hold on to. She let out a breath. Then she reached over and placed her hand on mine, and it was the careful hand of someone performing a thing, not feeling it. Which was fine, I understood that. "My name is Nora," she said. "Caleb," she nodded once. Then she looked forward and the car doors opened behind us. I didn't turn around. She had asked me not to in the way people ask things without saying them, and I followed her lead. I watched the window instead. The mountains were doing what the mountains did, steady and indifferent, and I sat beside this woman I had known for 40 seconds and tried to look like a man who had known her his whole life. A man passed our row slowly. I felt him before I heard him, that kind of awareness you get in a quiet space when someone is looking at you with intention. He paused. "Nora." Her fingers tightened on mine. She turned her head toward the aisle. Her voice came out even and pleasant in a way that cost something. "Thomas, I didn't know you'd be on this train. Your mother told me you were." He had a smooth voice. Practiced, she thought it would be a good opportunity to talk. Nora said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I'm with someone." A beat. "I see that." He said it the way people say things they don't believe. He was looking at me. I turned and met his eyes. He was well dressed in the way that requires effort, everything pressed, everything chosen, the kind of man who checked his reflection before stepping into a room. He looked at me the way people look at something unexpected that they've decided isn't a problem. "Your husband?" he said. "Yes," Nora answered. "Easy? Certain?" He looked at me a moment longer. I looked back. I didn't say anything, because there was nothing for me to say. She had said everything that needed saying. He moved on down the aisle. Nora faced forward. She let out a breath so small I almost missed it. Her hand was still on mine, and she didn't move it, and I didn't either. We both stared at the mountains going by outside. After a while, she said quietly, "Thank you." "You're welcome." A pause. "You didn't even ask." "I'll ask now if you'd rather." She shook her head. "No. Later," I nodded. I looked out at the ridgeline, the quiet, careful tension of her beside me, and I thought about the man who'd paused in the aisle and said her name like he had a right to it. Something in her eyes when she said Thomas's name. Not fear exactly, not anger exactly, but the expression of a person who had spent a long time explaining themselves to someone who never quite listened. I kept thinking about it. We were 20 minutes out of Asheville when she finally told me her name in full. Nora Hale. Event planner for a company in Charlotte called Meridian & Co. She planned corporate galas, fundraisers, the kind of events that cost more per table setting than I earned in a month. She said it simply, without apology or performance, the way someone states a fact about themselves that they've made peace with being complicated. I told her I made furniture. She tilted her head and looked at me like I'd said something interesting. "Custom?" "Mostly. What are you working on right now?" Nobody asked me that. Clients asked what I could build and what it would cost. They didn't ask what I was working on. She asked it the way you'd ask a friend. A dining table, I said. Reclaimed oak. I'm meeting the client tomorrow in Charlotte. Do you carry pictures? I almost laughed. I have a sparrow. She looked at me. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the carved piece. It fit in my palm, small and precise, the maple grain running through its wings at just the angle I'd wanted. I held it out to her. She took it carefully. She turned it in her fingers, and she studied it with the kind of attention that people usually reserve for things that surprise them. You made this. Last night. Testing a new knife. She set it on her palm and balanced it there for a moment. It's incredible. Then, more quietly, does it have a name? It's a test piece. Things can be test pieces and still have names. I thought about that. Margaret, I said. She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her. It changed her whole face. Margaret the sparrow. Seemed like a Margaret. She handed the bird back to me, but not before she held it another moment longer than she needed to. And I noticed that. I couldn't have told you why it mattered, but it did. We talked through the next curve of mountain. She asked how I'd gotten into furniture, and I told her about my grandfather's workshop in Burnsville, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil, the way he could look at a piece of rough lumber and already see what was inside it. She listened without checking her phone. In my experience, that was rare. Most people listened with half of themselves, the other half already preparing what they were going to say. Nora listened with her whole face. My grandmother had a rocking chair, she said, the kind with a worn patch on the right armrest from 60 years of her hand resting there. When she passed, nobody wanted it. Too old, too scratched. She paused. I kept it. It's in my apartment now. That's the best kind of furniture, I said. The worn kind? The kind that remembers someone. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You should put that on your website. I don't have a website. She stared at me. I get everything by word of mouth, I said. Caleb, she said my name like I had committed a minor crime. You absolutely need a website. People find me. The right people don't always find you. Sometimes the right people drive right past you because there was no sign on the door. She said it lightly. But it landed somewhere, and she seemed to sense that, because she turned toward the window for a moment and let it settle. Outside, the valleys were broadening out, the mountains behind us now, the land flattening toward the Piedmont. The light had gone gold and low. Tell me about Thomas, I said. She didn't answer right away. She folded her hands in her lap. How much did you hear? Just that your mother told him which train you were on. A small sound came out of her, not quite a laugh. That sounds like her. She turned back to the window. Thomas and I were engaged. 14 months ago. I called it off. What happened? She was quiet for a long stretch. I waited. I was good at waiting. It was part of the job. Nothing dramatic, she finally said. That was sort of the problem. There was no one moment I could point to. It was more like he had this idea of who I was, the version of me that fit best into his plan, and he was very invested in helping me be that version. He had opinions about my career, my friends, how I spent my weekends. He thought he was encouraging me. She paused. He wasn't unkind. He had his hands on the steering wheel even when he wasn't in the car. I thought about that. And your mother wants you to go back. My mother thinks I'm going to end up alone. She thinks Thomas is steady and successful and that I'm throwing away something real because I don't know, too particular, too independent, too much. She stopped. She shook her head once, very slightly. Her exact words were, Nora, you're not as easy to love as you think you are. The car was quiet for a moment. The wheels on the track kept their steady beat underneath us. She's wrong, I said. Nora turned to look at me. About that specific thing, I added, for what it's worth. She looked at me for a moment, measuring something. Then she turned back to the window. But something in her posture had changed. A small release, like a lock opening. We sat in comfortable quiet for a while. The train had pulled into a small station, then out again, and we were moving through farmland now, rows of late summer fields going amber in the evening light. I noticed her hands at rest. They weren't pressing flat against her thighs anymore. At some point I went to the diner car and came back with 2 coffees. I set one in front of her without asking. She looked at it, then at me. "Thank you. You looked like you needed it." She looked down at the cup. It was black. I don't like sweet things when I'm stressed. Figured. She wrapped both hands around it. Outside, a farmhouse slid by, yellow windows going on in the early dark. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Sure. She didn't look at me. She was looking at the window. "Why did you sit down? You didn't know me. You could have just walked away." I thought about it honestly. "You said, 'Please,'" I said. "And you said it like you weren't used to asking." She was quiet. "Besides," I added, "I had nowhere to be for the next 3 hours anyway." She smiled. A smaller one this time, softer. She didn't say anything else. She just held her coffee cup and looked out at the darkening fields, and I sat there beside her, and the train moved south, and something between us felt like the beginning of something I didn't have a word for yet. Then she shifted in her seat and glanced back toward the rear of the car. Thomas was 3 rows back, his head lifting as she turned. For a second they looked at each other, and then Nora faced forward. Her voice came out even and quiet. "He's not going to leave us alone. He'll come up here eventually. He'll want to talk to you." "All right." She looked at me. "You're not worried." "Why would I be worried?" She seemed like she was about to say something. Then she didn't. She turned back to the window, and I watched her reflection in the glass, and I thought that whatever she hadn't said was something she'd been carrying a long time. Thomas came up the aisle 20 minutes later. He didn't rush. He walked the way someone walks when they believe they have more time than you do. He stopped at our row. He was carrying his jacket over one arm, and he looked at the 2 of us the way a person looks when they've decided they're owed an explanation. "Nora." He didn't look at me. "I'd like 5 minutes." "Thomas." "I'm just 5 minutes. To talk. Before we get to Charlotte." His voice was patient. Reasonable, the kind of patient that has a hard edge underneath it. "I drove 4 hours to Asheville last weekend to see you, and you canceled. Your mother asked me to take this train, and I did. I think 5 minutes is a fair request." Nora's jaw tightened. "It's not a great time. It's a 3-hour train ride." He glanced at me now. "I'm sure you're—" A brief pause. "Husband can spare you for 5 minutes." She started to answer. I spoke first. "She said it's not a good time." I said. He looked at me. His eyes were sharp. He was the kind of man who was used to being the smartest person in the room, and he'd registered that he was being told no by someone he'd decided wasn't relevant. "I'm not sure this concerns you." "She's sitting beside me," I said. "So it does." A silence. His jaw moved once. He looked at Nora. "Your mother told me you've been struggling. That you've been isolating. That this," he gestured vaguely at the situation between us, "isn't like you." Nora's voice dropped. "You talked to my mother about me. She called me, Nora. She's worried about you. She's worried I won't go back to you." There's a difference. Something flickered in his expression. "That's not fair." "Thomas," she said his name quietly, and I heard 14 months of a specific kind of tired in it. "Please go back to your seat." He looked at her a long moment. Then he looked at me. The evaluation in his eyes was unmistakable. He was trying to understand what I was, where I'd come from, why she'd chosen me as her shield. I looked back at him without changing my expression. He put his jacket back over his arm and went back down the aisle. Nora exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry," she said. "You don't have to apologize." She stopped. She pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment. "My mother called him. I didn't know she'd been talking to him. She booked our seats on the same train without telling me. Her voice was steady, but her hands had started that careful pressing flat again. She's been doing things like this for months. Little arrangements, running into him at dinner parties, texting me articles about couples who work through their differences. How long has Thomas known? Since she started. I looked out the window. A water tower slid past, a town name painted on it I didn't catch. He's not going to stop, Nora said. Not today. He'll try again before we reach Charlotte. A pause. And my mother will be at the station. I turned to look at her. She met my eyes, and her expression was complicated. She texted me 20 minutes ago. She's coming to meet the train. She wants to have dinner. The three of us. She shook her head once. She has no idea I asked you to. She doesn't know you. She thinks Thomas and I have been talking this whole ride. She's going to be waiting there expecting a reconciliation. The train was running faster now. Open land going past. What do you want me to do? I said. She stared at me. The question seemed to surprise her. Not the words, what do you want, but that someone had asked it. I don't know, she said honestly. I've been thinking about that for 3 hours and I still don't know. She paused. What I do know is that I'm not going back to Thomas. I know that with absolute certainty. But the rest of it, she stopped talking. Outside, the first lights of the suburbs were appearing. Charlotte was close now. You have about 30 minutes to decide, I said. I know. We sat with that. Thomas came back 15 minutes before Charlotte. This time, he pulled up the empty seat across the aisle and sat facing us. He had the deliberate calm of a man who had planned what he was going to say. I'd like to speak honestly, he said. He was looking at Nora, not at me. I think we owe each other that. Nora watched him. Go ahead. I love you, he said. I know you think I have a specific idea of who you should be, and maybe that's true, but it comes from believing in you. Everything I've suggested, your career, your direction, it's because I could see potential you couldn't see in yourself. He paused. That's not control. That's someone who cares. Nora's expression didn't change. Thomas, your mother is worried, he continued. I'm worried. You called off our engagement over what? A feeling? A preference for solitude? Nora, real love requires compromise. It requires choosing someone even when it's uncomfortable. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, slowly, you reorganized my apartment when I was out of town. He blinked. I was trying to help. The storage was inefficient. You rearranged my grandmother's rocking chair. It was in an awkward spot. It was in the spot I put it. Her voice was still level, still controlled. You changed the food I ordered at restaurants. You edited my emails before I sent them. You signed me up for a time management course because you thought I worked inefficiently. She tilted her head slightly. That's not believing in me. That's believing in a version of me that you thought would be better. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. It was the expression of a man who had rehearsed something and was finding it didn't cover everything. I made mistakes, he said. I know that. I would do it differently. You've said that. And I mean it this time. Nora looked at him, and I saw something in her face that wasn't anger. It was something closer to sorrow. Not for herself. For him. For the fact that he genuinely believed what he was saying, and that was part of what made it so difficult. Thomas, she said quietly, do you know why I moved my grandmother's rocking chair back the day you left? He didn't answer. Because the day you left, I sat in that chair for an hour, without anyone telling me it was in the wrong place. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw worked once. Then he turned to me. She's been through something difficult, he said. She doesn't process things the way most people do. She needs time. And she needs stability. And what you're offering her, he gestured at me, at the absurdity of the situation, this isn't stability. Whatever this isn't real. Thomas, I said. She'll see that when Thomas, I kept my voice even. She knows what's real. That's why she made her own choices. You can trust her with that. He looked at me. The judgment in his expression sharpened. You don't know her. You sat down beside her on a train. That's true, I said. Then you don't have any standing here. Maybe not, I said, but she asked me to stay. And that matters more than standing. He stared at me. I saw something shift, not retreat, but a kind of recalibration. He was a man who was used to winning arguments. He wasn't losing this one because of me. He was losing it because Nora was sitting beside me, with her spine straight and her hands quiet. And she looked, in that moment, like someone who had never needed rescuing at all. He looked back at her. For a moment, something in his face broke open. Just for a second. Just enough that I saw it. I don't know how to let go, he said. It came out smaller than everything else he'd said. Less rehearsed. More honest. I know that's not your problem to solve. But I don't know how. Nora's expression shifted. The sorrow in it became something softer. I know, she said. I know you don't. I think you really did love me, Thomas. I think that was real. But loving someone doesn't mean you get to shape them. She paused. I hope you figure out the difference. I genuinely mean that. He sat there for a moment. Then he gathered his jacket and stood. He gave me one more look. It wasn't hostile now. It was the look of a man who understood that something had closed. He went back to his seat. Nora faced forward. She closed her eyes for a moment. I watched the city through the window, the lights thickening, the buildings rising, Charlotte resolving itself out of the dark. Your mother is going to be harder, I said quietly. A breath. I know. What do you want to do? She was quiet. She opened her eyes and looked at her own hands resting in her lap. My mother means well, she said finally. She got divorced when I was 12. She spent the next 20 years being very determined that I wouldn't end up alone. She thinks I'm making a mistake. Her voice softened. She's not trying to hurt me. She's trying to not repeat her own life through mine. I looked at her. That doesn't make it okay, she said. But it helps me understand it. I thought about that. About the kind of person who could hold someone accountable and understand them at the same time. It wasn't an easy thing to do. You're going to be all right, I said. She glanced at me sideways. I mean the mother part. And the Thomas part. All of it. I paused. You're clear about what you want. That's most of it. She looked out the window. The train was slowing now. We were almost there. Caleb, she said. Yeah, a hesitation. She pressed her lips together like she was deciding something. Will you walk me out? She said. At the platform. Just walk beside me. So she can see. I looked at her. In her eyes was something careful and open at the same time. Of course, I said. We pulled into Charlotte Union Station at 7:43 in the evening. The platform was busy with the ordinary business of arrivals, carts moving, people calling out, the cold white light of the overhead fixtures making everyone look a little tired. I carried my bag over one shoulder and Nora's rolling bag with the other hand, and she walked beside me through the car door and down onto the platform, and I think both of us took a breath at the same time. Dorothy Hale was standing near the pillar at the platform entrance. She was a small woman, maybe 60, well-dressed in the way that Nora was well-dressed, neat and purposeful. She had Nora's eyes. She was scanning the disembarking passengers, and when she found Nora, her face lit with the particular relief of a woman who had been waiting anxiously. Then, she saw me. The relief didn't disappear exactly. It rearranged itself. She looked from Nora to me to Nora's rolling bag in my hand, and she made a quick calculation I could see happening in real time. Her eyes found Thomas moving behind us on the platform, and the calculation sharpened. Nora, she said. Mom. Nora stopped in front of her. She leaned in for a brief embrace. When she stepped back, her voice was steady. This is Caleb Marsh. Dorothy looked at me, Her eyes were assessing in the practiced way of a mother who has been making judgments about her daughter's choices for 30 years. "Hello," she said. "Hello, Mrs. Hale." Thomas had caught up. He stopped to Dorothy's left. Dorothy looked at her daughter. Her voice came out careful. "I thought you and Thomas might have had a chance to talk." "We talked," Nora said. Something shifted in Dorothy's face. Not hostility. Fear surfacing. "Nora, I don't understand what's happening." "I know." Nora's voice was gentle. "I know you don't. Dorothy stopped. "I don't want you to be alone. I've watched you pull back from people for months. Thomas is a good man." "He's stable, Mom." Nora's voice was calm but clear. "I need to say something, and I need you to listen." Dorothy went still. "I know why you're scared," Nora said. "I know you watch me and you see yourself, and you're terrified I'm going to end up the way you did after Dad left. I know that fear is real, and I love you for trying to protect me from it." Dorothy's eyes had gone wet. "But I'm not you," Nora continued. "And this isn't the same story. And the way to not be alone isn't to go back to someone who loved me like a project." A pause. "I have to find that out on my own terms." "You have to let me." Dorothy looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she looked at me. There was something searching in her gaze, not hostile, but uncertain. The look of a woman who has been holding something tightly and isn't sure whether to let go. "Who are you?" she said. Not rudely. Honestly. "I make furniture," I said. "I'm from Asheville. I met your daughter on the train." She blinked. "Today, yes." She looked at Nora. Something passed between them that I wasn't part of and didn't need to be. Dorothy looked back at me. She took a breath. Are you kind to her?" It was a question that assumed more than today. I answered it that way. "Yes," I said. "I am." She nodded. Once, slowly, then she looked at Thomas. Thomas was watching Nora with the expression of a man who understood now that something was finished. He gave Dorothy a small, tight shake of his head. She saw it. Her shoulders dropped half an inch, like something she'd been carrying had gotten heavier. "All right," she said quietly. "All right, Nora." It wasn't approval. It wasn't relief. It was a mother deciding to stop fighting what her daughter had already decided. It wasn't everything. But it was enough for tonight. Nora reached out and squeezed her mother's hand. Dorothy squeezed back. Thomas said goodbye briefly, without looking at me. Then, he walked toward the taxi rank. The three of us stood on the platform for a moment. Then Dorothy said she needed to get her car, and she hugged Nora again before she went, longer this time, and I saw Nora hold on. Then, it was just the two of us. The platform was quieter now. The crowd had thinned. Our breath made small clouds in the cold. I still had her bag. "I can take that," Nora said. I handed it over. My hands felt empty. She stood there with her bag handle in one hand and looked at me. Around us, the station was doing what stations do, humming, moving, the small commerce of departures and arrivals going on in every direction. But where we stood felt separate from it, like a room inside the room. "You didn't have to do any of that," she said. "I know. The part with my mother. Thomas, you could have just walked off the train and Nora," I said her name and she stopped. "I know." She was quiet. She was looking at me the way she'd looked at Margaret the sparrow in her palm, like something that had surprised her into paying attention. "Why didn't you?" she said. I thought about it. The honest answer. "Because 3 hours ago you asked me to stay," I said. And I did, and somewhere between Asheville and that platform, staying stopped feeling like something I was doing as a favor. She looked at me for a long time. The lights overhead were steady and bright. A train was announced on the opposite platform. The cold moved through from the open end of the station. She said, "I told you were my husband for the next 3 hours." "You did." That was... She stopped. Her voice had lost its evenness. Just slightly. That was the most absurd thing I have ever said to a stranger on a train. "Probably. I don't do that." She shook her head once. I don't ask people for help. I don't put my hand on a stranger's hand and tell him to be someone he isn't. I plan events for a living. I manage details. She stopped again. Composed, I offered. Composed, yes, a pause. I was not composed today. No, I said. But it was the bravest thing I saw anyone do. She looked up at me. Her eyes were full. I had no right to ask you, she said. I didn't even ask, really, a breath. I saw you standing there with your hand on the headrest and you looked like someone who wouldn't run. And I needed someone who wouldn't run. I reached into my jacket pocket. I held Margaret the sparrow out toward her. She looked at it. I want you to have her, I said. Not because of today. Because of the way you held her and gave her a name. Nora looked at the sparrow. Then she looked at me. A tear slipped down one cheek and she let it go. She took the sparrow from my hand, and her fingers closed around it. We stood in the middle of the Charlotte train station, and I thought about Claire telling me I was too ordinary, too settled, too quiet. I thought about all the times I'd sat in my workshop, carving something beautiful into being, and wondering if that was enough. I thought about the window seat in Car 7 and the mountains going blue in the distance, and a woman 2 rows up managing a heavy bag alone, and the 45 seconds of my life that changed everything after. I didn't come on this train to meet anyone, I said. Neither did I. But I'm here. She nodded. And tomorrow I'm going to be 40 minutes from you, I said. In Charlotte, meeting a client about an oak table. And when that's done, I'll still be 40 minutes from you. If you want me to be. She pressed her lips together. The tear had dried. She was putting herself back together the way she did, quietly, steadily, piece by piece. I should tell you, she said. I'm not easy. I don't build easy things, I said. Easy things don't last. She let out a breath that turned into something close to a laugh. And then she said it. She said it the way she'd first said it. Quiet, certain, like something she'd decided and wasn't taking back. You're my husband for the next 3 hours. I looked at her. Except, she said, the 3 hours ended 40 minutes ago. They did. So, I said. She tilted her head. A small smile. The real one. What do we do now? I reached out and took the handle of her rolling bag back from her. Now, I said, I walk you to your car. I walked her to her car. Then we stood in the parking garage and talked for another hour, while the temperature dropped and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and neither of us said we should probably go. She gave me her number. I gave her mine. I called a rideshare and she watched it pull away. And later she texted me, safe drive. Get some sleep. You have a table to discuss. I didn't sleep much. Not because anything was wrong, because something had opened up somewhere in my chest that had been shut for a long time, and it was the kind of opening that needed space and air and a little bit of time before it settled into something you could name. The client meeting went well. He wanted the reclaimed oak. Afterward, I called Nora and she answered on the second ring and we talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular. The easiest conversation I'd had in years. We saw each other the following Saturday. She drove to Asheville. I took her to the workshop and showed her what I was working on. A headboard in walnut. The grain running diagonally across the panels. She walked around it and ran her hand along the surface and said, "This is going to be someone's favorite thing." I thought about her grandmother's rocking chair and didn't say anything, but I felt it. We ate at a diner on Lexington, and she told me about an event she was planning for a children's hospital, a fundraising gala, and the way she described the details, the centerpieces, the lighting, the way she'd arranged the program so the children's choir would perform first and the speaker would end on something quiet, it made me understand that she didn't just plan events. She made people feel like they were somewhere they belonged. That was her craft, the way wood was mine. Finding the shape of a thing that would make a room feel like a home. She kept Margaret. The sparrow. I saw it on her kitchen windowsill the first time she had me over for dinner, set at the end of the sill where the light came through in the afternoon. She'd put it in the only spot in her apartment that got proper light. We weren't fast. Neither of us trusted fast anymore. But we were steady, and steady was what we both knew how to do. Month by month, the distance between Asheville and Charlotte became the kind of distance you build into your week without thinking. Her mother came to dinner one night. The three of us at Nora's apartment. Dorothy was careful with me at first, but after dinner she asked about the furniture, and I talked about the grain and the walnut headboard, and she said, "My kitchen table is 30 years old and falling apart." "I don't suppose," I said I'd be glad to. We figured out the details over dessert. Thomas remarried 2 years later. Nora heard through a mutual friend and told me quietly, without much feeling attached. She said she hoped he was happy. I believed her. The oak table I was meeting about that day turned out beautifully. It seated 8. The clients put it in a farmhouse outside Charlotte, and they sent me a photo later of their whole family around it at Thanksgiving. 10 people. The table full. That's the thing about making something right. It holds more than you planned for.